how are we going to stay mentally sharp during the pandemic shutdown? Now, I did it with an epic tech adventure. So, what can you do during a pandemic to keep sane and mentally sharp? The answer is work on some technology projects. Even though that's not your business and you're not a technologist, working on some technology projects can keep you sane and positive during the shutdown. When you're at home all the time, after all, you can't go out, you can't do much, you can't travel, you can't really walk around very much. What's going on right now is that if you have a computer and it's connected to the internet, this is your lifeline to the outside world. But is it enough to just consume? You can't just watch Netflix all the time. You can't just play video games all the time. You can't just read news all the time. You have to do something to work your brain. You have to do something to grow. And one of the things that you can do without leaving your house, your place of shelter, is work on various technology projects. You can take on projects that will be helpful to you. And if the project isn't helpful, at the very least, you learn a lot about technology. And it's important to learn about technology because technology is everywhere. It just seeped everywhere in our lives. And one thing for sure, in this pandemic, technology is something we can rely on. Technology ultimately is going to be the thing that saves us. It will be some scientist or company using the latest technology in biology or chemistry or both who will make a breakthrough and create a vaccine that protects us. Now, in terms of what we're relying on, just look at companies like Amazon, Apple, Google, and Microsoft. They're the backbone of our survival in this world right now because they're not going down. We are relying on them more and more, and because of that, it is helping us survive. We can communicate better with each other. We can do our job using technology. Look how Zoom has taken off for everyone, not just businesses. Schools are using Zoom. People are having private Zoom parties. So over the last few years, or actually, over the last few weeks, I went on an epic adventure where I learned tech about the internet and created some projects. So what kind of projects can you work on? Now, once you have a server and a static server address, you also want to have a domain name. Now, this you probably know, right? Facebook is a domain name. CNN.com is a domain name. Every website name you know on the internet is a domain name. Now, a domain name is not a server, and a server is not a domain name. You have to pay an annual fee, usually around $10 to $15 per year, for a domain name that isn't already used by someone or another company. There are various companies that can help you register and get a domain name. Squarespace does it as part of its service for hosting your website, but there are companies that do nothing but register and sell you the domain names. The company I use, because it has a decent reputation, i.e. it's not trying to upsell you all the time or making it hard to transfer your domain to another site, is Hover, hover.com. You can go to a service like Hover and you can try different domain names to see if they're available. And you can also get domain names, suffixes, other than the traditional .com. They have .tv, they have .blog, they have even .poker and .bet. Be careful though, some of these suffixes are very expensive annually. Go for the traditional suffix, .com. That's a classic. Now, I set up multiple sites for less than $5 per month on Linode, Linod. Linode. So how did I do it so cheap? Well, what I found out is that there are various companies which give you a good server that is cheap, but you don't get the service that holds your hands to create a website. Think of it like this. When you buy food, if you go to a store that does wholesale rather than retail, you get a bigger deal. That is why Costco has such good prices. Well, on selling servers on the internet, there are companies selling server services wholesale. Their market is not selling retail to you and me. Their market is really selling to developers. Their market is not selling retail to you and me. Their market is really selling to developers and companies that need a lot of internet servers. The biggest company doing this is, of course, Amazon. Amazon many years ago realized it was really good with having servers on the internet and having services on the internet for its own Amazon website. After all, Amazon was selling zillions of books and then selling zillions of other things on its website. Amazon realized it was so good with servers for its own business that it realized that it could sell services to third parties. Amazon created cheap priced servers on the internet for developers. That business is called AWS, Amazon Web Services. AWS took off, particularly with developers making apps for the iPhone. They needed services on the internet to send digital data to their apps on the iPhone. AWS was very good and cheap service to do so. You probably don't know this, but many of the web services and apps are hosted on AWS. It is a huge business for Amazon. Well, others are competing with Amazon on that wholesale business. Microsoft pivoted from just focusing on Office and Windows to now providing internet services for developers through its Azure service. Google has its own cloud service. Now, there are internet hosting companies that are much smaller than these big three. Several years ago, I found a good deal at one called A Small Orange, ASO. I got 5 gigabyte of server space for $5 per month. I purchased this originally to host a website for a relative who was a doctor because my relative didn't have a website. The website was just to have straightforward information about my relative's office. I created the website with what some would consider a non-traditional app to create a website, Hype by Tumult. Tumult was created by some guys who had worked at Apple. Hype was created to create animations using HTML5 technology. Do you remember Steve Jobs' April 2010 Thoughts on Flash announcement? It is still on Apple's website. Flash, as that technology, is the technology that created all those animations on the web starting back in the 1990s and continuing to a couple of years ago. Adobe owned that technology. Apple refused to allow the iPhone and iPad to run Flash on those devices' browsers. This was a big deal back in the early days of the iPhone and iPad because some sites and content on the internet could not be accessed because of the lack of Flash support. But Steve Jobs was adamant that Flash sucked. In his lengthy polemic against Flash in April 2010, he listed many reasons Flash was not good, including that it was proprietary and chewed up battery life. Jobs and Apple pointed out that HTML5 technology, which was open source and part of the backbone of the web, could work better and replace Flash. Tumult was created to create an app on the Mac which could create HTML5 animations that could replace Flash animations. So I dabbled in this great app when it first came out. Using this app, I created a website with buttons and menus for different pages, which I uploaded to ASO and linked up to a domain name I purchased at Hover. After I created the relative's website, I realized that in my ASO account, I could create additional sites on the same 5 gigabyte space. I also discovered I could do this through an interface app that ASO had for my server space called cPanel. cPanel is a graphical user interface app for your server space so you can navigate easily through your server and install apps. It isn't free, but I think it comes part of the ASO account. ASO must have paid the cPanel company that leases or sells that app. So why is there this cPanel interface? It is there because pretty much all these servers run in an operating system called Linux. It was created by this guy back in 1991 named Linus Torvald. Practically every server on the internet runs on the version of Linux. Since it's open source, developers and businesses have created forks of Linux over the years. On most servers on the internet, Debian or Ubuntu is used. The most famous fork of Linux is Android, which runs the smartphones and tablets competing with Apple's iPhone and iPad. So through this cPanel interface on ASO, I created 2 more websites using WordPress. One for my website, maxfuture.com, and the other one for my kids' sports. I wanted to create WordPress sites because for many years I read and heard how a big chunk of the web was WordPress sites. WordPress is so successful because it's an open program. This is what Wikipedia says. It says WordPress.org is a free and open source content management system written in PHP and paired with MySQL or MariaDB database. Features include a plugin, architecture, and template system referred to within WordPress's themes. It goes on to say WordPress was originally created as a blog publishing system, but has evolved to support other types of web content, including more traditional mailing lists and forums, media galleries, membership sites, learning management systems, and online stores. WordPress is used by more than 60 million websites, including 33.6% of the top 10 million websites as of April 2019. WordPress is one of the most popular content management system solutions in use. Now, if you don't have it hosted by WordPress, you can download it and install it on a server for free. I mean, there are plugins and themes, that are free, but there's also ones you can install that cost money. But the point is, you can create a WordPress site using the WordPress for free, basically. So I had never tried a self-hosted website, WordPress, before, so I went for it. Because ASO had a cPane, in cPane there are different server apps that you can put into your server. It was pretty easy. And then I hooked up those 2 sites with domain names from hover.com. So great. I then had 2 websites, and my relative had 1 website on a $5 per month server from ASO. Everything was going well until last year, when I realized ASO was charging me more than the $5 per month. Here's how much they were charging and the increases over the year. I started in 2016 with them, and it was $40 a year. But it kept going up, and this past year, they charged me $94.60. So you see, it went from 40 to more than 90 in a few years, but that isn't what got me to finally switch my site to another company that leases servers. It was something called SSL. What is SSL? SSL is that lock you see on the domain address when you go to various websites, like my website, maxfuture.com. That lock tells people going to your website that there is security on your site, particularly that you are who you claim you are. This is particularly important if the people going to your site are putting private information on your site. For example, a bank which has customers logging in would want such security. Or if your site was collecting email addresses from people signing up for your site, you may have seen these locks on website addresses popping up a number of years ago. But they took off, and practically every site has that lock because Google says if you don't have that lock, then it will lower the score for your site. This is an announcement from Google on February 8th of 2018. For the past several years, we've moved toward a more secure web by strongly advocating that sites adopt HTTPS encryption. And within the last year, we've helped users understand that HTTP sites are not secure by gradually marking a larger subset of HTTP pages as, quote, not secure, end quote. Beginning in July 2018 with the release of Chrome 68, Chrome will mark all HTTP sites as not secure. So my site, I realized, had that not secure label on it, which made it look kind of stupid. So I wanted to get rid of it. So the key is you got to have that S after HTTP. That's what makes the lock. What is going on is that the connection to your site is being encrypted when you have that, and a third-party service is giving you a certificate certifying that your site is encrypted. Over time, particularly since the summer of 2018, I realized my sites look stupid and poor without having this HTTPS and having the corresponding lock. I Googled around and found that some hosting sites for servers, particularly ones that helped host self-serving WordPress sites, provided free SSL certificates. I checked with ASO, a small orange, and they didn't provide any free service. In fact, they charged a substantial amount. They charged at least $40, for 1 year for an SSL certificate. And if you wanted a wildcard SSL certificate, I guess that would cover subdomains. It was $150 a year. As you can see, an add-on service for an SSL would cost me a lot more money through this ASO service. The thing is, I looked around. There is a free SSL certificate service called CertBot that is provided by the Electronic Frontier Foundation. The EFF is a highly legitimate nonprofit organization which among other things protects the free use and free speech on the internet. I looked around the web and found out that some server providers which had CPain installed provided an app on CPain to allow users to easily install a free CertBot SSL certificate for the self-hosted WordPress site. I checked ASO's CPain and none existed there. I then emailed ASO support and they confirmed they didn't provide such a plugin for the free service. The fact that ASO was charging me more than $90 per year and not even providing me with an easy way to install a free SSL certificate really bothered me. Then I took a look at Linode. For years I heard about Linode on podcasts, as Linode sponsored a lot of tech podcasts. Linode, I realized, was for customers who are developers. Linode was really competing with Amazon's AWS, Google Cloud, and Microsoft's Azure. The thing about Linode that caught my eye was it was cheap. Linode's cheapest plan gave me 25 gigabytes of storage on a server and 1,000 megabits per second out in speed, all for $5 per month. By comparison, ASO only gives 500 megabytes of space for $6.51 per month. $8.80 per month would get you just 5 gigabytes of space. That was the plan I was on at ASO that was originally $5 per month when I signed up. Linode wasn't offering me a CPain app for free with the server space I would lease. It turns out if I wanted CPain, I would have to pay extra. And that is part of the reason that ASO was charging more than Linode. Nor did Linode offer a free SSL certificate. I decided to try Linode because it had a community and answers where you can find out information on how to set up a Linux server without using a CPain program. I had to figure out Linux commands to set up the Linode server. Then I had to figure out how to put SSL certificates on those servers. I did it. I was able to transfer my sites from ASO to Linode. It wasn't easy. It took time. But here is the important thing. It was really satisfying as I learned how to SSH communicate from my Mac to the Linode server, use the terminal app on the Mac after SSHing to the Linode server to download and set up apps on the server using Linux commands, set up Apache on the Linux server to create virtual servers given I had only one Linode server and wanted to have more than one website on the server, download and installed WordPress from scratch, navigated in the server files and folder structures for WordPress, used Nano, this is an app on Linux, to edit and change the config files for WordPress and Apache, and then configured MySQL on the server, which is the database for the WordPress sites. I also configured the DNS on Hover and Linode to set up the various domains I created on one Linode server. After completing the setup of the various sites and setting up the domain connections, I still had to solve another problem, getting SSL certificates so I would have the lock symbol and the HTTPS for my sites. The great and free solution I eventually came across was to install the certbot certificates using command line instructions on the terminal app on my Mac. In other words, the terminal app was connected to the Linux server. These free certificates only last 3 months, but certbot comes with commands where you can set up what's called a cron. A cron is a service on Linux where you can automatically run commands. So I set up a cron using certbot so that certbot will renew the certificate. So I set up a cron using certbot so that certbot will renew the certificates a week or two before the certificates would run out. This is pretty cool. So if you go to maxfuture.com, you can see I set up the site and it works on Linode. But the fun in my learning did not stop there. I continued to explore static websites. Now, while researching installing WordPress on Linode, I came across a trend that has been going on over the last 5 years or more, something called static sites. A number of bloggers and developers are arguing that static sites are faster and better on the web than dynamic sites. A dynamic site, in contrast to a static site, changes based on what goes, who goes to the site. So take Facebook, for example. It's a dynamic site because based on who goes to that site, the site changes. WordPress is a dynamic site because it uses a database in the background, MySQL, behind the website. Now, it turns out a number of geeks and others on the web figured out the websites that are static run faster on the internet. Static sites don't change what you see based on going to the site, and they don't use a database. I learned that one static site platform is called Hugo. There is a website at gohugo.io where it says that Hugo is, quote, the world's fastest framework for building websites. It is written in Google's developers language called Go. I was curious to try it because 1, it claims to be much faster. 2, you can write your post as simple Markdown text files. And 3, Linode's new object storage plans can host static websites. So let's go through each of these. First, faster website. This one is easy. Why wouldn't I want a faster website? If it is quicker to load for users, users will like my website better. I hate going to websites that are slow. I hate websites that load all sorts of videos and crazy stuff and ads. Nice, simple websites are the best. The second reason is because Hugo works with Markdown files. Now, what are Markdown files? Now, Markdown is a lightweight markup language originally created by John Gruber. That's what it says in Wikipedia. The fact is that Hugo works with Markdown files, and that's why it appealed to me. I have played around with word processors that use Markdown for many years. On my Mac and my iOS devices, I have long used an app called Byword. There are many apps on iOS and on the Mac that use Byword, that use Markdown. The beauty of Byword is that there isn't any hidden code in formatting such as you get in Microsoft Word or even Apple's Pages. You write in simple text, and if you're going to format it, the code is simple and easy to read, so it isn't confusing. Hugo treats each Markdown text file like you create as a blog post or a page on the internet, depending on what folder you put it in. It is a really simple concept. So writing in Markdown really appealed to me, and it is a plus for using Hugo. Finally, if I can host a site on Linode's object storage, that is a great deal for website hosting. Linode gives you 250 gigabytes of storage for just $5 a month. That is 10 times as much storage for the same price as its regular storage that can host dynamic sites like WordPress. Hosting sites cheaply on the internet is pretty amazing after all, and the cheaper you can do it, the more amazing it is. Technology is about bringing efficiency and reducing the cost. Think about how hard it was to publish anything so other people could see it. In the early 1700s, a young Benjamin Franklin wanted to run his own printing press and a newspaper. He had worked for a press in Boston when he was a teenager. After he fled Boston to Philadelphia to get away from his domineering older brother, he wanted to use his experience in running a press to create his own press. Franklin obtained significant funds, a fortune in today's funds, and traveled by boat all the way to London to purchase an old press and then transport it by boat to Philadelphia. The rest is history. He became a prominent publisher, inventor, legislator, and founder of the United States. You can read more about it on Wikipedia. Now, today you can run hundreds of sites each for under $20 a day using Linode's 250 gigabyte object storage program for $5 per day. You can have all the static websites you create share the $5 a month storage on Linode. $60 per year divided by 100 sites is 60 cents per year. A domain for each site would be $15 per domain. That brings the cost to $15.60 per year for each domain. In terms of a device to set up the sites, you can get a cheap computer like a Chromebook and use your phone's hotspot or free internet connection in a library or park. The friction to publish now is 1/1,000,000th the friction that a young Benjamin Franklin faced. Now, Hugo. Getting back to Hugo, you can install the Hugo publishing platform on your server, or you can publish it on your Mac and then have the static website it creates sync with your website or your server. I decided to run it on my Mac. Here's how I did it. First, it involves using your terminal app on your Mac. Remember what computer screens looked like before the Mac was created and Microsoft copied the Mac and created Windows? It looked like MS-DOS. Giving instructions by text is called using command line. All of you using iOS devices and Macs and Windows and Chrome computers may be oblivious to the subterranean world underneath the user interface. On Macs, the user interface is built on an older technology called Unix. The operating system for the Mac is running on a relative of Unix. Unix was created by the telephone company's computer lab back when there was one telephone company for the entire United States. The terminal app is using Unix-like commands. Those commands are very similar to the Linux commands on a Linux server, as they are both related to Unix. For installing on a Mac, the people behind Hugo suggested to first install something called Homebrew. Homebrew is a package manager that allows you to download Unix-type packages on your Mac or even on Linux. The idea is once you install Homebrew, you can then move easier, install other things on your Mac. Here's the command on the terminal app to do so. It is not for the faint of heart. If you've never used the terminal app before, so the instructions are, they look like kind of gibberish, but basically they are command line instructions. But don't do this if you're, faint of heart, because the terminal app is something intimidating. Now, once the Hugo publication system is on your Mac, you can create a Hugo command in the terminal to create a new site, and it creates a folder on your Mac for the site with various folders in it. I have a screenshot on my website that shows you it's just basically a regular file folder structure. The folder that is labeled public is the web documents you put on your server. The rest of the folders are what Hugo uses to make the website. The folder type content is where the content you create, for example, writing, photos, and videos go into. And the folder called themes is where the different themes you can use to make your website. In content, there is a folder called posts. That is where your blog posts go. Take a look at mine. What you see are separate Markdown files. Each one is a separate post. These Markdown files for each post take up hardly any storage as they are pure text files. They are easy to back up and use if you change where your website will be. As for the themes, you download different Hugo themes people created and put it into the themes folder. Then you open the config file and reference the theme you want in the theme folder for the site. It's a simple word reference. I have an example of what the config file looks at. Basically, you just say theme equals and then the name of the theme you downloaded. I found this crazy Hugo.386 theme that makes your site look like the old 386 PCs, the ones with MS-DOS commands. I created a subdomain at maxfuture.com that shows off this Hugo theme. You can go to hugo.maxfuture.com. To add posts to this site, I added a new Markdown post file in the post folder. Then I ran a command line in the terminal app to remake the site in the public folder and then sync that folder to the server. If you run Hugo on the server, you can just add the Markdown file on the server, the Hugo's content post folder, and it will rebuild the site on the server. The fun didn't stop there. After I successfully created a Hugo site, I then got interested in another program to create static websites. What caught my eye about it is that it uses the Apple's Swift language to create a static site. It's called Publish, and it's by a guy named John Sundell, and you get it on something called github.com. First things first, what is Swift? Swift is Apple's code language that Apple developed for developers creating apps and programs for iOS devices and the Macs. Back on June 2nd, 2014, Apple announced Swift at the WWDC conference it holds every summer. No one saw it coming. For years, Apple and developers for the iOS devices and Macs used a language called Objective-C. Objective-C. Swift was supposedly to be simpler to use and to be more powerful. Apple has been pushing everyone to use Swift and created an app on the iPad many years ago for kids and everybody for people to use Swift called Swift Playgrounds. Over the years, I've dabbled in learning Swift through the Playgrounds app. During the last year, one of the podcasts I've been listening to is called Stack Trace, which is hosted by two developers, John Sundell and a guy named Guiando Rambo. These two young developers are very entertaining. Rambo is from Brazil, and he helps out the website 9to5Mac by looking deep into beta iOS systems for clues for what Apple is working on in the future. Sundell is a Polish developer who runs the great Swift website, Swift by Sundell. He gives tips on the Swift language, and it's a great resource. It is John Sundell who, during the last year, created an application called Publish, which uses the Swift language to create a static website. His own website, Swift by Sundell, is built with that Swift language tool. Having had success building a Hugo website, I thought, what the heck, let's try building one with Swift. So here's how I did it. So in terms of how to use this Publish program that Mr. Sundell created, you have to go to GitHub to download it. Similar to Hugo, you can download using commands on the terminal program on the Mac. There is one difference though. Because this Publish program uses Swift, you need to make sure you have Xcode on your Mac. Xcode is Apple's program for developers to create apps on the iOS devices and also programs on the Mac. So similar to Hugo, after you use Publish together with Xcode, it creates folders on your Mac. And the folders look very similar but somewhat different than the ones that Hugo creates. The key thing is the key is that you create, there is something called the content folder. And it's in the content folder that you put your Markdown posts and other content. What goes onto your website, though, is in something called the output folder. That is where it's different from Hugo, which calls it the public folder. Now, I don't think you can run this on the server unless the server has Xcode or something that runs Swift languages. Most servers run on Linux. There are places you can rent Macs as servers. For example, there's a place called Mac Stadium where you can rent a Mac as a server, but that is much more expensive for a minimum plan compared to Linux, as Mac Stadium's cheapest plan is around $80 per month for a Mac Mini. So publishing a Swift static website would require you to sync the output folder on your Mac with your server. So I created a Swift static website successfully, and I'm hosting it as a subdomain at swift.maxfuture.com. It has a rather simple looking design, which you can see when you go to it. So the adventure didn't stop there. I kept stumbling upon things to try out on the $5 Linode server I rented. Now, during this pandemic, everyone is using live video programs to connect with each other. People are using FaceTime and Skype. But Zoom became very popular because it's easy to use. Then I heard about this service, Jitsi, which is open source and it's supposed to be very secure. So what is Jitsi? In the open source entity's own words, Jitsi is a set of open source projects that allows you to easily build and deploy secure video conferencing solutions. At the heart of Jitsi are Jitsi Video Bridge and Jitsi Meet, which lets you have conferences on the internet, while other projects in the community enable other features such as audio, dial-in, recording, and simulcasting. So why should you install Jitsi on your own server? You can make calls for free using Jitsi's own website. It works with the Jitsi app on the iPhone, which you can get. They also have an Android app. The reason to get Jitsi installed on your own server is 1, it is more secure, and 2, how cool would that be? It is more secure on your own server because you control your server. You don't have to worry that someone at Jitsi is eavesdropping on you. With Zoom or other services, you don't control the server that your calls are going through. Same with FaceTime or Google Meet. They are all going through a third company's server. Here you can install Jitsi even on a server in your home. The second reason to install it on your own server is it is cool to do so. You can tell people you have your own video calling service. So I decided to go forth and install Jitsi. It wasn't that hard to install Jitsi. The Jitsi website gives you the instructions to install it on Debian or Linux server. I installed it as a subdomain on one of the sites I had on Linode. One of the problems I had after I installed it is that the initial setup allows anyone to make a video call. I didn't want that, as I have a small server, and if people I don't know were using it, it could rack up my server bill. I found a video from early 2020 from someone named Nerd on the Street on YouTube that was very helpful in configuring Jitsi after I had it up and running. And I have a link on my website to the video. His video showed me how to configure Jitsi so that a call could only be initiated with my password. So Jitsi works on the server I'm leasing. But because it is the cheapest server and it is small, I don't think it can take a lot of calls at the same time. I would have to upgrade the power of my server if I wanted to make many calls. Then I went on to something else. So after Jitsi, I was listening to a podcast called Release Notes. One of the hosts runs a business on the internet where he makes websites for professionals, tax accountants. I realized listening to him that his business involves creating WordPress sites on a Linode server. I heard this after first transferring my sites to Linode. On this podcast, I heard he created for his customer a service on their website where their customers, in other words, the tax accountant's customers, could upload documents to the tax accountants. In other words, his tax accountant customers could have their own Dropbox or iCloud built into their site. The way he did this was using an open source system called Nextcloud. As stated on Nextcloud's website, Nextcloud is a allows you to share and collaborate on documents, send and receive email, manage your own calendar, and have video chats without data leaks. As fully on-premise solution, Nextcloud Hub provides the benefits of online collaboration without the compliance and security risks. Basically, Nextcloud is an open source system taking on big players like Microsoft, Google, and Apple, and allowing anyone to host cloud services on their own servers. Now, you can use whatever part of it you want. You don't have to have every component work. So I installed Nextcloud on my own. this is really cool. You can invite users to share your cloud services. According to Nextcloud, it is really popular in Europe, particularly Germany, and a lot of universities and companies use it. I don't know why schools and companies don't use it here. They could save so much money that they are paying to Microsoft and to Google. Finally, I want to talk about the one purchase I made during this crazy adventure. Panic's Transmit 5 program for the Mac is the one software purchase I made. For most of this technology adventure, I was mainly using the Terminal app on my Mac to navigate the folders and files on my Linode server. It was a real pain as you have to type out commands to get to the right folder. Then I remembered that for many, many years, the bloggers and podcasters who I listened to, who love Apple and Macs, always praise the Transmit program. I checked it out and purchased it. It was a godsend. It's basically a powerful graphical user interface for connecting to servers with SSH connections and navigating and editing files on servers. It's on its 5th generation. It is well polished and a beautiful app. Once I started using Transmit to connect to my Linode server, it made life much easier. The Transmit app has a feature in it where if you have to use the Terminal app, when you're in a folder in Transmit, you can quickly have that folder address go into the Terminal app so you don't have to then put it in the Terminal app. This makes navigating the server much quicker than doing it with the command line instructions on Terminal. So the conclusion, there are many adventures in technology. Our ancestors like Ben Franklin went on their own adventures with tech. It is unfortunate that we are living through this virus pandemic that is destroying lives and taking away our normal life in the outside world. But many of us with decent computers and internet connections are lucky. There are adventures and learning available on our fingertips. Use this time to explore what you don't know. In my situation, having set up various WordPress sites, having created a Hugo static site, created a Swift static site, created a Jitsi server, and created a Nextcloud server, and all the while reduced my server cost by going to Linode, and most importantly, got those SSL locks on my domain addresses, I am now at the end of this particular adventure. What adventure comes next? Stay tuned. This is Lex.